Welcome to the episode where we talk about the SJW liberal agenda. Conservatives run away now.
Greetings, and welcome to Skylanders Portalcasters, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything Skylanders. I am your host, GFDitto, and I am joined today by co-host Inklander and special guest star Nagemeikenu. And in today's episode, we are going to be discussing feminism and representation in Skylanders and media. So, Inklander and Nagemeikenu, how are you guys doing today?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
Woo! I'm excited to be back. It's so
Yes.
nice.
Yes,
welcome back to the show.
Yeah, it's our
Yeah.
first time we have a guest back on the show, and also in the same season, too. So, we just had you on a couple episodes ago, but very, very excited to have you back, especially for a really good topic as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm excited to dig in.
Yeah, so we figured this would be a good follow-up to our capitalism paywalls and Skylanders episode. We wanted to do another one that was kind of, I guess, in a similar vein, a similar kind of discussion about the industry as a whole, but also kind of having Skylanders as a prominent example. So I think that this will be a pretty good episode, hopefully. We'll find out.
Yeah, let's see if we can do it justice.
Yes. Although this is a big topic, because when we say representation, that could mean any number of things. We are probably going to be leaning mostly into feminism and gender and the LGBT representation in media. However, we might bounce around to other things like, body shaming, and there's any number of things that we might talk about, but the
All
most
of the
likely,
things.
yeah, like all of the things will probably come up, at least to some extent, but the primary focus of this episode, at least, is going to be mostly focusing on the sex and gender side of stuff. So speaking of, I guess we probably want to start off with the theory before we move into Skylanders, and then before we move into media as a whole. So we're going to kind of stick to that same formula we had for the capitalism episode. So, Ditto, why don't you start us off with the difference between sex and gender, why that's important, and then we can also move into a definition of feminism as well.
So, when it comes to the difference between sex and gender, it's literally the difference of sex is what your body is. It's the biological way that you were born. Whereas gender is more cultural. It's more about perception and how people are perceived, typically in regards to sex, but not always attached to.
Well said.
Right, yeah. So sex and gender are very different things. They often are still kind of confused and kind of linked. And I do think that's pretty much because in Western culture, for so long, we've always tied gender to sex. We've always seen it as male and female gender and male and female sex. So because of that, they've always been very interlinked in Western society. Meanwhile, in other cultures, for quite a long time, there's actually been multiple different genders. It's just now finally starting to become realized in Western culture that we actually have not a parallel here, that actually both sex and gender are on a spectrum, because sex as well, a lot of people think of that as just XX and XY chromosomes. They think of it as strictly biologically male and biologically female. But the thing is we can also have people that have 3X chromosomes, or, any different combination, 1X chromosome. So even sex itself is on a spectrum. Like, there's not just strictly, biologically male or biologically female. There's actually different differences when it comes to the biological sex as well. But when it comes to gender, that is pretty much, as Ditto said, cultural. Like, that is a discussion of the behavior, the way that people are expected to dress, the way that people are expected to talk, the different kind of tasks that you're expected to do. Like, there are very much different stereotypes that go with gender, and for the longest time in Western culture, that's always been kind of perceived as part of the sex side of things. People have always kind of been like, oh, well, men are the ones that do the heavy lifting. Men are the ones that do the yard work. But the thing is that's cultural. There's no reason why women wouldn't be able to do that either. Just it's always been kind of stereotypical of women clean the house, women do the cooking, but men can do that too. But they've been so ingrained in our society for so long that we have the separation, and women have often been associated with the private sector, with the home, home. Meanwhile, men have always been kind of associated with the public sector and with the business side of things and the bringing home the bacon side. But we're actually starting to get to that point in Western culture where we're seeing all this stuff break down in society, and people are realizing, oh, like, these are actually just stereotypes that we're putting on ourselves, and actually gender can be any number of things, and it's not just the way that we are supposed to dress, the way that we're supposed to act. Like, that can be tied to anyone, however anyone wants to be. It's not actually tied strictly to the biological.
Yeah.
So sex and gender is pretty important. It's a really important distinction there. But also another important distinction is exactly feminism and the different waves of feminism. So Nagemeikenu, do you want to maybe talk about like the definition of feminism and maybe some of the different waves of feminism that have been present throughout time? Because there've kind of been three, but it's starting to look like there might be a fourth kind of happening. So do you want to have like a little overview of that?
Yeah, so I've got a dictionary definition of feminism just for the sake of what everything means.
Excellent.
Feminism is defined as the advocacy of women's rights based on the equality of the sexes. So when feminism came to be, feminism was called feminism by a Frenchman, le féminisme. It was originally in the French culture, and it's called this because the French man who coined the term wanted it to be a reference to the people he saw it hurting the most. He saw the discrepancy between how women were treated versus how men were treated. It didn't gain widespread use until the 1970s, but basically Simone de Beauvoir is the original when this started to get in movement, and that was in the 15th century. So we're also talking about Marie Lejade de Gournay, Anne Bradstreet, and François Poulain de la Barre in the 17th century. So we've got three waves so far, and the first wave is what is happening during the 19th and early 20th century. This is focused in the United Kingdom and the United States, and this is when we see the suffragette movement. This started with the women's right to vote, as it became a political campaign rather than just something people wrote about and talked about beforehand. So that is the first wave. It's essentially everyone trying to get women the right to vote. And then the second wave is happening in the 60s to 80s. And this is where things start to get a little hinky, because sometimes the second wave kind of blurs into the third wave, because there are still second wave feminists who still use the theory and the understanding of what the second wave feminism was all about today. And now there's a third wave happening today, and that happened in like the 90s through now, that is kind of, we can see turning into a fourth wave, but the fourth wave hasn't been like defined yet.
Right, yeah.
So it's, again, things are blurring with time. But the second wave is largely focused on discrimination and usually the perception of women in general, just everywhere. What is the expectation of a woman in the workplace? What is the expectation of the woman in the home, and why? And how do we change how women are viewed in order to supplant the notion that they have to be lesser or weaker or just not necessarily made for certain aspects of work, like heavy lifting and little stuff like that. What are the expectations of women and how do we change them? The third wave is, again, 90s, and they basically came about as a response to second wave feminism because there were some initiatives, some perceived failures, really, of the second wave feminism that people thought, well, this particular way of thinking hasn't quite addressed all of the issues, or perhaps the perceptions they're trying to give women aren't actually helping. Some viewed the second wave feminism as essentialist, which basically means they take what they perceive to be what it means to be a woman and laid it down to really simple terms. And the third wave said, well, that's not very nuanced. We need to make sure that every kind of woman is included. We don't want to focus on the bare essentials of what makes a woman, because that's not applicable to every woman. And you're just doing the whole treating a woman as what we need the bare essentials to be, which is exactly what the patriarchy did. And so we need to stop that and maybe try to have a more nuanced view of what women can be, what their potential is, and support women in a way that maybe we can look at a woman without seeing her as a middle-class white woman. And typically, this is something considered to be post-structuralist, which is a big fancy way of saying we had a structure of what made a woman, and it's not useful. And therefore, we need to break away from that structure and find something else.
Yeah. So I think that's a pretty good overview of the different waves. Second wave is really interesting because, as you said, that's kind of like 50s to 70s-ish. Like, there's a lot of argument on when these waves start, when they end.
Yes.
And one good thing to remember about second wave feminism is that's coming kind of off the tails of World War II, where a lot of women were able to be entering into the workforce for the first time because the men were off at war. And so then that second wave feminism is really struggling with that difference between the public and private sector of, like, a lot of the men were like coming back and it's like, hey, we want our jobs back. And then the women were like, well, no, we want to do this. And so there's a lot of this kind of interplay there. And then the third wave is definitely kind of this idea of like realizing that there are multiple different ways that, woman can be defined. We also see womanism coming in. We start seeing intersectionality with race coming in to play with third wave feminism. And then we also are now kind of at that point yet again where we're starting to argue. It's like, okay, well, now with the Me Too movement and everything like that, like, it's starting to look like we're getting way more themes of empowerment coming into play. So is this actually starting to transition into a fourth wave feminist movement? So it's really kind of interesting to see how all these are coming in. So, but yeah, that's definitely really interesting. And you mentioned post-structuralism. That can also be applied to literature, of course, because these waves can actually be seen throughout modernism, postmodernism, post-postmodernism, because literature can't come up with very good like definitions for waves, once we hit modernism, it's just, let's just keep adding post on the end. But the same thing with my anthropological background can also be seen with the waves in archaeology, because we have first wave kind of relating about at the same time as culture history, then we have second wave kind of happening with processualism, and then we have third wave coming in with post-processualism, which actually starts having feminism in the archaeological record being way more pronounced. So these waves are actually very much tied to a lot of different theoretical backgrounds in literature, in anthropology, and I know in your art history background, they're there too. So it's really interesting.
Absolutely. Depictions of women have changed according to how women are viewed and perceived and interpreted. There are feminist pieces of art that you can look at, and you can, according to the values of each wave, determine actually when that art was created. And so there are different ways to depict masculine and feminine things, and something that the second wave feminism typically does in art is try to redefine the masculine and the feminine. What can be masculine about an object and how can we make it feminine? It's a lot of symbolism, and it's a lot of critique of what makes something masculine, what makes something feminine, and why does it need to be any of that at all, which goes into the third wave of why does it have to be masculine or feminine? It's a cooking pot,
Right, yeah. So it's definitely true. And there you have it, where we're starting to see kind of the third wave kind of relate almost to postmodernism and even to post-postmodernism a little bit as well. So, like that's something we see in literature as well, where like we have postmodernism, which is a little bit more on the abstract side, but then postmodernism is bringing it a little bit more home back to the traditional way literature was written and being like, all right, well, how do we deal with these themes and these questions now that we've already kind of started questioning them? Like it's kind of interesting. So one other thing that we need to talk about when it comes to theoretical is actually a little bit more on the entertainment media side, which is actually how we're going to be getting into the rest of our discussion and our discussion about Skylanders. And the other thing that we really want to highlight is actually the Bechdel test. And this has started to get a little bit more thrown into pop culture recently, but it's still, I think, mostly among academics. So we're still going to just go ahead and describe it anyway. So Nagemeikenu, why don't you go ahead and tell us who created the Bechdel test and what it is?
All right, so this Bechdel test was named after a cartoonist, Alison Bechdel, who wrote a comic strip called Dykes to Watch Out For in 1985. The idea was then created by Liz Wallace, and it was based off of her and the writings of Virginia Woolf. So when we look into what the Bechdel test actually is, it's really evaluating how feminist or how inclusive a piece of media can be of women, or of there are other ways to use it. People use it to evaluate racism and homophobia in a work, or in the more positive way, how pro-gay community or how pro-feminist a work can be. So the criteria for the piece of media is that there are at least 2 women involved who talk to each other, and it has to be about something other than a man. And so this is now applied to movies most commonly, because that's what it was originally designed to evaluate, but it can be used to evaluate things like books and, of course, video games. So today we're going to take a little bit of a look into how the Bechdel test can help us understand Skylanders a little bit better.
I did a deep dive into the interactions between characters throughout the Skylanders series, and not just the game series. I even took a look at the TV show Skylanders Academy as well, and I tried to see how much of this franchise actually passes the Bechdel test. And I skimmed through every cutscene available in the Skylanders games, with the intention of trying to find out which games pass the test based on, are there 2 female characters that interact with each other discussing anything but a man, as Nagemeikenu just detailed the criteria for this test to be. And I was surprised to find that only one game in the Skylanders series has 2 female characters interact with each other at all.
Oh.
And that would be Skylanders Trap Team. There is a point in the Rainfish Riviera where Callie and Mags do speak to each other. But
Yes.
Nowhere else in the series does this happen. In the first Skylanders game, there are only 2 female characters to begin with, and Persephone, one of them, only ever interacts with the Skylander. So technically, you could force an interaction between 2 female characters by playing a female Skylander, but I wouldn't qualify that as passing the test, because that is user choice and not design.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I would agree.
And this is how it proceeds throughout the rest of the series. Even in Swap Force, where there would be reasonably, naturally, there would be interaction between 2 female characters. Between the Chiefess and Tessa, especially as Tessa is supposed to take the role of Chiefess herself, she's the successor, there should naturally be some interaction between the 2 of them. But there is none. Avril and Tessa, there is no interaction between the 2 of them either. In fact, any cutscene that Avril shows up in is literally only populated by Flynn or Flynn and Sharpfin. Tessa isn't even present for any of these cutscenes. And then Chaos's mom, when she recovers Chaos from the Skylanders, also kidnaps Tessa. And when it looks like there would be interaction between the 2 of them, it fades to black.
Oh.
So we get 0 interaction between characters where there should naturally be interaction. And I have to wonder, how hard did they have to try to not have any female-on-female interaction in this series? Because it felt unnatural that there was none, especially when I went back and analyzed the fact that Tessa had literally just been kidnapped, and she turns to look at the woman who kidnapped her, and it fades to black.
There's no interaction at all.
There's no interaction at all. And then even after that, after the boss fight against Chaos's mom, and she's trapped in the mirror, Flynn and Tessa are still there. Chaos, his head shows up. They do an interaction thing with Chaos, and then Flynn turns around towards the mirror and says, "Bye, scary lady." And that's it. Tessa's right next to him. The one who had been kidnapped by this woman. No interaction.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's pretty bad.
That's
Like, it's more than bad. Like, the fact that they have that whole sequence with the Chiefess and Tessa, where they're, like, walking down the stairs next to each other, and the Chiefess is talking about how Tessa's going to be the new Chiefess, and doesn't even address Tessa.
No,
that's a problem.
She only addresses the people of Woodborough, but never Tessa herself. And it feels unnatural to go back and to watch these cutscenes looking for interaction and realizing that there's none there when there naturally would have been.
yeah.
And this proceeds throughout the entire series. There's the one moment in Trap Team where Callie and Mags interact with each other, and that's it. Nothing in Superchargers. In fact, in Superchargers, when Tessa shows up, Callie just kinda is absent from the rest of the cutscenes from there on out, until the final cutscene.
Yeah, that's pretty blatant. Like, it almost felt like Vicarious Visions couldn't have more than one leading female at a time. It's like, once Tessa got introduced, Callie disappeared from the cutscenes, but then once Tessa goes back to Woodborough, like, Callie starts suddenly appearing again. Really weird.
That's disjointed and really not great at all, storytelling-wise. That makes no sense.
And then in Imaginators, it's the same. The NPCs are shoved off into the academy and only seen once throughout the game. So the NPCs then become the previous Skylanders. So you have like Spyro, Eruptor, Gilgrunt, Cinder, Stealth Elf guiding you through the levels. But the only female-on-female interaction you find in Imaginators is in DLC, where Stealth Elf interacts with Master Cammy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So technically, Imaginators would also pass this test if you count the DLC, which is increasingly difficult to find.
Yeah, that's true. So that's definitely a really strange thing. Although, at least we can say, though, that there is actually a pretty decent amount of stuff that passes the Bechdel test in Academy, though.
Yes. Yes, in Skylanders Academy, the TV series, there is a lot of interaction between Stealth Elf and Cassandra, between Stealth Elf and Ningini. There's not a lot of female characters in the show, but there is plenty of interaction between them. And it feels, for the most part, natural.
Yeah.
That's something.
Yeah, there's like that whole empowerment episode between Stealth Elf and Ningini called I Dream of Ningini, where like Stealth Elf goes to Ningini for training, and they kind of help build each other up throughout the whole episode, and they have a whole arc there together where they're not talking about a guy, so that's actually a pretty good episode that manages to pass the Bechdel test. But yeah, as you say though, and this is a problem with Skylanders as a whole, and this will really pull us into the conversation that we want to have about Skylanders in this episode, is that Stealth Elf in the TV show is the only female lead. Like, we have Spyro, we have Jetvac, we have Eruptor, but Stealth Elf is, like, the only female lead in Skylanders Academy. Like, yeah, we get Hex occasionally, we get Flashwing occasionally, we get Ningini, but, like, for the most part, it's just Stealth Elf. And that can be reflected in the games as well, because in the games, the most percentage between male and female characters that we get is we get pretty much 75% male and 25% female in Superchargers. That's the ratio of characters that we get in the lineup. Meanwhile, for every other game, females tend to make up 20% or less of the roster of new characters that are introduced to Skylanders each year. And that's a pretty big concern. And that's not just something that we see in Skylanders. That's not just something that we see in the video game industry. That's actually something that we see in the media industry as well. Only about 7% of women are directors. Granted, that number is rising, but that's incredibly low. And we also see that with characters as well. Like, you know, we often see really only between 20 and 30% of, like, a cast being, you know, female characters, or even named female characters with speaking roles. That, like, the amount of female characters that we actually see as protagonists or with dialogue is actually really only around 25%, just like Skylanders. And that's actually a problem. Ditto and I did some calculations before this podcast, and we actually found out that the percentage of female Smash characters is actually higher than the percentage of female characters in Skylanders. That's a problem when you're dealing with a roster of 339 different characters. If a roster of about 80 is able to have like a higher percentage of female characters in a roster of 339, that's a problem.
It really is. It's highly problematic.
That's drastic.
Yeah, it's really drastic. And it makes you wonder, who made this decision? Who at Toys for Bob and Vicarious Visions was like, all right, let's actively go out of our way to make sure that this isn't 50-50.
And we've touched on this before a little bit when, especially speaking on the lack of female representation in the games when it comes to Swap Force, in that every one of the new Gimmiklanders, the Swappables, every last one of them is male-coded. There is not one that could even be remotely taken as female.
Correct. I took the liberty of examining, with my art historical background, the imagery associated with these Swap Force Skylanders, and all of them tend to have a very typical male figure. Typically, when designing a male character, designers will use a mesomorph body type. This is the norm for that because the mesomorph body type is considered the ideal for men. The mesomorph body type is typically characterized by broad shoulders and a narrow waist, creating what's known colloquially as the Dorito, like an upside down triangle of a body, and then the legs go from the bottom of the triangle, and that's what that looks like. And basically every single one of the Swap Force Skylanders follows that body type. The shoulders are broader than the waist, and none of them have really any feminine characteristics whatsoever as seen in media. All of them are very clearly male-coded.
Yeah, and there's a reason why Nagemeikenu is bringing that up. And there's an interview with the presidents of Vicarious Visions that worked on Swap Force. Guha and Karthik Bala. We're actually going to be linking that in the description, so you can check out that interview. I recommend you pause this, go listen to that interview for the first 5-ish minutes of it, and then come back to the podcast. But basically, the reason why this is being brought up is that there's basically this interview between them with Family Gamer TV, where Family Gamer TV is talking about how his daughter really likes Skylanders, and how he was wondering if there were going to be more female Skylanders this year. And he also asked a question about the Swap Force. And basically their response was, oh, we tried to go with a gender-neutral approach, so we made them all male. And he tries to, the heads of Vicarious Visions continue to dig themselves into a hole by trying to claim that they're gender neutral, by being oh, well, he's a he to me, so I'm using male pronouns there. And it's oh no. It just keeps going into a hole where it's just they keep digging themselves further into it, where they keep trying to claim that these characters are androgynous, but they keep describing them as male. And as you said, they are very much male-coded characters. And their other excuse for this is oh, well, male characters perform just as fine with our female demographic, so it doesn't matter. That's basically another thing that they say in this interview. And it's okay, fine, I guess if you want to use that argument, go ahead. But the female characters in Skylanders are also really great. I think some of the female characters are some of the best Skylanders. We got Splat, we got Stormblade, we have all these really fun, powerful female characters. So why can't you just make the argument on the other side of that? Why can't you say that there's more female characters than male characters? Because they also perform well with the demographic. I think that's really weird to me, because I think someone at Activision made the decision, and we don't know who it is, we're not trying to call anyone out for it, but someone very clearly made the decision at Activision to be okay, don't have as many female characters, because they presume that women aren't going to be interested in playing an action-adventure game. And they think that if they had an even split of male and female characters, that would suddenly, drop their sales, which is just simply not true. Women can be role models for men, men can be role models for women, and I don't see why, they feel the need to have less female characters because they think they're going to have a bigger male demographic, when even those female characters are going to perform well with that male demographic.
And you bring up a really great point, in my opinion, that women can be great role models for men as well, because when, say, a 5-year-old boy sees a woman doing amazing things, why shouldn't that little boy admire that woman?
Exactly.
Like, that there's no reason to only give your male demographic male figures to look up to. That's ridiculous. That's not a good enough reason,
Right.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. If women can look up to men in that way, because there are so many heroes out there, and I mean, if you look at the superhero fandom, a lot of them are guys. Am I not supposed to idolize Captain America just because he's a guy? That's really illogical and irrational.
Exactly. Like, this kind of idea that they try to put on these characters in this interview is just like futile. It really is, because they're trying to make this argument that honestly you could just make the other way. And like, the thing is like, if you're trying to argue that from one direction or the other direction, then I think that's yet again when all these gender stereotypes begin breaking down, because it's like, who cares about the gender? Like, why can't someone just be a role model for being heroic? Or why can't a kid like a character because they just like their moveset? And it's almost as if like they're trying to imply in this interview that that's kind of not the case, or that it can only be one-sided, and that's just that's not true. Now, meanwhile, like, also, like, talking about the swap force when it comes to, like, the male coding of the characters, again, not trying to call anyone out specifically, but, like, someone did the banhammer on having female swap force Skylanders. And I think the reason for it is the fact that they felt like they couldn't have male and female body parts intermixing on these figures. And that's really freaking annoying, because yet again, who should care? And I think at the end of the day, they were trying to avoid making a statement on it by making them all male. I think they kind of felt like they could sweep it under the rug a bit by just making them all male, so like no one questions it. But they literally say in the interview, because they have interchangeable parts, we had to take a gender-neutral approach to it, hence making them all male, which, one, isn't gender-neutral, and two, it's basically transphobia. They're trying to go out of their way to not make a statement on it because they're trying to appease a different, non-liberal demographic, but they're making a statement on it by trying to not make a statement on it. And that's something we talked about in the Nagemeikenu episode, but I really think it needs to be reiterated here, because, like, by not allowing you to just, like, have this gender fluidity between these characters, it's really annoying to me. It's kind of ridiculous that they felt like that would become such a massive issue that someone at Activision was like, okay, make them all male. That's just not good. Because I would have really liked female Swap Force Skylanders, personally. And, like,
Yeah.
who cares? Who cares if Washbuckler got a skirt on one of his swaps? I don't care. Let's have some customization there, you know? It's just like, it was them trying to not make a statement, but at the end of the day, like, it was them making a statement. And it really doesn't make them look good, because it makes them look like they are not supporting, you know, like, the LGBT side of things. And it's bad.
Yeah, it also implies that male is the default, which is a whole other issue.
Oh, yeah. Well, they definitely made male the default in the Skylanders franchise, didn't they? Because, like, if your franchise can only have about 20% of a female demographic, like, that just has so many bad implications. It really does. And,
Yeah.
like, I don't know why they just didn't feel like they could do it 50-50. Women take up 52% of the population anyway. Like, they're more populating the Earth than men are right now. So, like,
And additionally to that, I mean, if you say your demographic is a certain way, I find it odd that no one has thought to say, but what if we made our demographic more open, and then we could sell more?
Right. Yeah, that's another thing.
I feel like that business strategy would actually work. If we appeal to people who are outside of our audience, we could grow our audience.
Yeah, come on, capitalists. That's basic economics for you. Like,
I just I don't see how that's a good business strategy.
that's true, though, right? Because they are strategically pinning themselves into a corner by saying, all right, well, men are going to be buying our game, so that means we need to make male characters because only guys play action adventure games. Like, there's so many assumptions that they are making when it comes to their character lineup.
Yeah, assumptions are never really good, ever.
Yeah, we know what that phrase is. We won't say that because
Yeah,
we try to keep
exactly.
this podcast roughly PG, but
I
you know
managed
what
not
it
to say
is.
it.
You know what it is. You can say it to yourself. You know the phrase about assumptions. So,
Yes.
yeah. Now, while Vicarious Visions slash Swap Force has issues when it comes to the Swap Force characters, Toys for Bob does at least a little bit better later on in the franchise.
It would seem that they did do a little bit better, especially when it came down to Imaginators and the creator that was developed for the creation crystals. In that, when designing your own Skylander, they give you all these parts to use, and the creator doesn't break it down to male and female parts. You can use whatever you feel suits your Skylander at that point in time. You can create a male Skylander, you can create a female Skylander, you can create a Skylander using bits and pieces of both, you can create a furry Skylander, you can create an aquatic Skylander. The possibilities are limitless. And I feel like that's coming a long way from what they did with Swap Force, and probably the example they should have taken when designing the characters for the Swap Force.
I totally agree. Yeah, when you look at that character creator and you open it up and you're able to give like a character that has a mustache, like a dress, or you're able to pick from a wide variety of voices, some that are not gendered, some that are male, some that are female. Like, you can have like a robotic voice if you want. And as you said, you're able to create a furry character if you want. The fact that you are able to like also like affect the body size, you're able to make them tall, short, like there's no like body shaming here really either. Like the fact that they actually managed to give you a wide variety of stuff to where you are able to create whoever you want in this game and basically have them like be however you want. If you want to make a gender fluid character in Imaginators with the parts they give you, you can do that. Plus, the great part about being able to change parts on the fly as you unlock new parts, and as you're able to, just open up that menu, keep customizing your character as you go, that's also really great because that means that that character can change as you unlock stuff, and it can change along with you in your own personal experience and journey with the game. And I think that's really a good thing. It's such a far cry from what they did with the Swap Force.
Yeah, that's kind of the opposite of what they did with Swap Force.
Yeah, like it's kind of incredible. So yet again, we're praising Toys for Bob and their greatness.
Yeah.
But
Shocker.
I mean, granted, there's still the issue with the lack of female characters in the game. Like when it comes to like Activision made female characters, there's still way less than there needs to be, even in the Imaginators roster. But the fact that you're just able to go create like 100 different female characters if you want to, it's there. You can do it. So, that's pretty good. And like, it's actually very, very representative of kind of whatever you want to do. And it's actually crazy how representative it is. It's just to the point where you're able to even go in and change all the colors of the character as well. Like you're able to change skin tone, you're able to change hair color, eye color, you're able to change the color of the clothes. Like they really allow you to get deep into this if you want to. And the fact that none of this is locked behind gender, the fact that there aren't like male hairstyles or female hairstyles or anything like that, it's just there. That's great. And that actually is very, very inclusive, and that's something that should be praised about Skylanders. While it has so many other issues when it comes to gender and when it comes to representation, it does do a good job in Imaginators.
Yeah, I kind of regret not getting more into that on my previous episode with y'all, because I don't think I talked about the Imaginators crystals at all. at that point because I didn't get far enough in the game to use them and I didn't know what they looked like or what they were. And then I've been watching some playthroughs of it so that I could get more into what Skylanders is. And I realized, oh, I missed a whole lot of opportunities when I was playing that game. I could have been anything I wanted to be, considering what had already been unlocked by people playing previously. I wish I had known what the crystals were and how to use them properly when I was playing them for the first time.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like that'd probably make a huge difference because if you don't see a character in Skylanders that represents you, you're able to make it. And I think
Yeah.
that's really important. Like, if you wanted to create a non binary character in that creator, you could. And that's
Mhm.
important.
That is huge.
It's just unfortunate that it took them until the 6th game to actually make this a possibility.
Yeah, I do
Agreed.
agree. I know that they probably went with the character creation aspect as like a last hurrah because they knew it'd probably be the last game for a while. But like, I mean, come on. Even without a character creator, you should be able to have like a wide variety of characters that are, you know, non-binary or gender fluid or any number of things. More female Skylanders. Like, it is pretty sad that it did take them this long to get to this point. But it is good to see. But granted, throughout the rest of the franchise, the female characters almost feel like tokenism, if I'm being completely honest, because of how little they are represented in some of these past games. And bringing up tokenism, we might as well kind of talk about this now in the industry as a whole. So, tokenism is an interesting thing because it's the practice of making only a perfunctory or symbolic effort to do a particular thing by recruiting a small number of people from underrepresented groups in order to give the appearance of sexual or racial equality within a workforce. So, here it's talking about workforce, but tokenism is often talked about when it comes to film and when it comes to media. And so basically what's kind of happening in tokenism is typically like writers or, you know, whoever is looking at this piece of media internally is like, oh, you have a lot of straight white males in there. Why don't you throw in a couple people to make it look like it's a little bit more diverse? And here, that kind of does feel like that's what's happening with Skylanders in some cases, because, like, women, as we've already talked about with the stats from earlier, are already underrepresented in media when it comes to having speaking roles and being featured as main characters. And so here, that kind of basically feels like that's the case. They're just like, oh, well, let's throw in a couple more female Skylanders so it doesn't look like it's all dominated by men. And it's like, that's also a problem in the industry as a whole. Like, we see that a lot of the times where we just see like a character thrown into a piece of media that is just like, oh, so it's a bunch of like white characters except for this one character, or that's how we end up with like stereotypes like the gay best friend. You know, like
Yes.
that's a trope for a reason in media because they will just be thrown in to have like a gay character and that's it. And so that's kind of an issue.
Yeah. It's for me, you can tend to see when one is a token character, when A, they're the only one of that type, and B, when that character of the type doesn't really have any development of their own. They do not move the plot forward, and they do not necessarily participate in the plot beyond maybe a few conversations and interactions that don't actually add anything. Possibly they're there for humor, but typically when a character is put into a story, it's because they are needed for the plot to move forward.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's very easy to spot a token character because they don't do that. They don't necessarily participate in the world they exist in.
Yeah, like it's definitely a problem. Like, you know, for instance, the gay best friend character, right? Like they're typically
Exactly.
there, like usually like at the beginning of the film, they're like there to give the main female lead almost entirely. Usually it's a female that has the gay best friend. But
Uh-huh.
like they're usually there to give the main female lead some sort of advice about relationships or about life or something, and then you might see them once or twice again in the film, and that's pretty much it.
Yep.
That's a token character, because they don't really get any kind of other representation or any other kind of plot that's fleshed out. But then again, like, the thing is, and this is kind of really the sad part, is like there's also benefits to token characters in that if they weren't in the film, there'd be no representation at all. So
Exactly.
it's always better to have some sort of representation than literally none. And that's kind of disappointing. And the other really kind of negative thing with token characters is that, like, all of the representation is riding on that character. So, like,
Yes.
if you have a gay character and they're the only gay character, and then you kill that character, there goes all of your representation. And it's just, it's bad because, LGBT characters are a minority. And, like if you kill them, one, you're promoting the bury your gay stereotype, which we can also get into. And, like, two, like, you're literally just taking away the representation that, like, tons of your audience just had. Like, if you kill off your non-binary character, then your non-binary characters don't have anyone else like them on screen. And it's just, it's not good. Like, me personally, one thing that I don't like in media is, like, I identify as pansexual. And the thing is whenever there's, like, a, LGBT character, they're always typically trans, gay, or bisexual. Like, well, very rarely are they actually bisexual. Like, you never actually, like, I can think of one, maybe two instances of a bisexual character. And when you have a coming out story, like, typically it's like, a guy who has a girlfriend, and then by the end of it, he realizes he's interested in this guy, and it's like, oh, never mind, all this time I didn't realize that I was into guys. And so then he drops the girlfriend and ends up with the guy, and then, like, suddenly he's just gay. I personally can't cite a time when it's like, oh, know what I've realized? Like, I'm actually into both guys and girls, and then he ends up deciding to stick with the girlfriend. Like, we've never seen that, really, that I can think of. And, like, that's something that needs to be represented more.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem because we say that sexuality and gender is a spectrum, but we don't see it in media at all, really. We see, again, opposing sides, gay or straight, trans or cis. There's no middle ground necessarily between what characters can be, and I think that's a huge missed opportunity because, as we all know, the world is not black and white. It's usually very gray. And the trouble with hitting gay versus straight is that that's not all there is. And when we have that represented in media, then you get people like me who never even heard the word bisexual until they were 16. And you have people like me who didn't realize there was an option to be non-binary at all until they were 21. That's a problem.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Like, you might feel a certain way. Knowing that there's someone else out there that's like you, that feels similarly, goes a long way. Like,
yes,
it really
it
does.
And, this isn't just about, we are focusing on the queer community, LGBT plus issues, but this also goes for people of color. How often do we see a Native American on the screen? And what kind of Native American do we see on that screen?
Right. Yeah. Typically when Native Americans are on screen, like, they're typically depicted as, like, the wise, ancient, spiritual kind of side of things. They're typically depicted along the lines of a little bit more, like, involved into their, like, specific background and their cultural heritage. And they're typically right, like, they're never depicted, like, in, like, a different kind of light than that. They're always depicted as, like, very spiritual, very, like, faithful, and almost also kind of not always, but sometimes they have, like, a grudge, like they're kind of depicted in that way. And, like, that's not okay. Like,
no, it's not. It's very flat. It's not a good character.
Yeah.
And you very rarely see a Native American who is modern, like, who actually lives and exists in the world of 2021, where we have people who have cell phones and internet and actually use it. Like, you can put a Native American in a contemporary setting. You can give a Native American an office job. you know?
Yeah.
But we don't see that, do we? We see the Native American who is the park ranger.
Right. Yeah, it's
That's
always,
literally
or
the
you see them in like
only.
a we're encroaching on your land situation, like
Exactly.
yeah.
And that's the only conflict we see. And I mean, let's expand it to the Latinx community. How many Latina characters are the maids?
Yeah.
How many are the seductresses? You have very stringent types of characters that you see based on what color their skin is. And that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it really is. Like that, so this is not just an LGBT problem. Like this is something that, like, as we've been able to very clearly show with Skylanders, is like something that's a problem with gender. It's a problem with race, like it's a problem with sexuality. Like this is something that is pretty like across the board. Like if you aren't a straight white male, then you're going to be underrepresented in media.
Yeah, and that's just not fair, and it can change, as proven with Imaginators. There are ways to make different characters that represent people who actually exist
Yeah.
beyond, the straight white guy.
Yeah,
Like,
like pretty much. Yeah, and like I mean, even then, I think the way that men are often expected to act, not just like in media, but in society, is also kind of bad, and that's kind of
yes, it
sort of
is.
changing. But like men are often kind of depicted as like they're supposed to be like unemotional, or they're supposed to only be able to get angry. Like they're not able to cry, they're not able to feel like any kind of emotion other than like, I don't know, anger. Like that's the only way they're able to like really express that. Like that's like the
Yeah,
stereotype.
and I mean, for me, this also shows why feminism is not just for women, it's for everyone. Because as much as women have been hurt by the expectations put on them, the flip side is also true. Men are hurt by the expectations that are put on them. And then you have people like me who are non binary who have no idea where they fit because society didn't really account for people like me.
Yeah, but like that's the thing, is I do think that showcases that feminism is for everyone, because like it is this idea that like as someone that is male, I don't know what it's like to have to deal with the glass ceiling. I don't know what it's like to have to deal with discrimination. Like I recognize that I have privilege as a male and as someone that's white, but the thing is like I'm able to do research on that. I'm able to understand that as best as I can, but I don't have the lived experience of that. And so that's something that, I think needs to get brought to light more. Like people need to realize that white privilege is a thing. People need to realize that male privilege is a thing, because I'm able to do something that as someone that, identifies and presents as male, that people that are female and, non-binary or trans are not able to do. Like I have things a
Yeah.
whole lot easier, and it's important to recognize that. But also at the same time, like men still are pigeonholed. Like
Mm-hmm.
men are still put into the stereotype of like, if I'm in a room and there's like a guy that's trying to lift something that's really heavy and the whole room is filled with women and I'm the only guy in there, I'm going to be the one that is expected to help him lift that.
Yep.
Even though I am a
Yes, you
weakling
are.
and I can't move anything very well, like I would be the one that's expected to lift that piece of furniture. And that's a stereotype. Like it's like they look at me and it's like, oh well, you're a guy, so you have to be strong. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like the only
Yeah.
sport that I did in high school was Quidditch.
Yep. And then you have me who played 5 sports throughout high school.
Yeah.
And no one would expect me to move anything because I am 5 foot nothing. So there is
So
also that.
yeah,
Like,
so
I
that's
would
the
be the
thing.
better option to help move the furniture, but no one would even consider me.
Right. So that's the thing, is like there's a lot of stereotypes in play, and it's like, if I started like crying while watching like a romance movie, I would get strange looks from people. But if a
Yes, you
girl
would,
did it, they'd be like,
unfortunately.
oh, whatever. Like there's still that stereotype of like women are more emotional. And it's like, that's not true. Men are just expected to repress it.
Yeah, and for me, it's kind of like the hormonal argument. Oh, you're just hormonal. No, I got news for you. You all have hormones.
Yeah.
And it has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on. It probably has something to do with the way you spoke to that person.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they felt hurt by it naturally because you said something hurtful. And now you're seeing the results.
Yep. So that's a problem. And like we're seeing a lot of people, luckily, with this third, potentially fourth wave feminism starting to kind of be brought to light over their not okay actions. Like, for instance, especially at the time that this episode airs, it'll be like a year ago, but J.K. Rowling has been revealed to be a trans exclusionist radical feminist, or a TERF as it's abbreviated. And like, that's bad, because as someone that used to be a really big Harry Potter fan, like, now I'm having to grapple with that. It's like, how do I be a Harry Potter fan but also condemn J.K. Rowling? And I know that you are actually well known for doing Harry Potter fan fiction stuff and organizing fan fiction stuff for Harry Potter. And what exactly was your reaction to like J.K. Rowling expressing these views?
For me, it was heartbreaking, obviously, because I do consider myself trans. I do not identify with the gender I was assigned at birth. And so when I heard about her beliefs and was educated on what that means, part of me wanted to give up the community I had built. Part of me wanted to throw away everything anyone had ever given me that was related to Harry Potter. But the fact is, in my studies, you talk about something called the death of the author. The death of the author is this theory that once something is created, it is now separated from the creator. It exists on its own, by its own merits. Basically, what this means is that anyone's interpretation of that media, be it a movie, a book, a piece of art, is therefore valid and is not really based on what the author intended for it to be, because once that piece of media is out in the world, it becomes a part of that world and not necessarily connected to the person who created it. We do not need to know why the author wrote something the way they did. We have the words that are separate from that, because now we have to look at that work with the same analytical eye we would use to look at anything else. The only real perspective we should consider when interpreting something is our own, and our own biases. So when you have J.K. Rowling causing harm to a minority community, I can also say, well, Harry Potter is not just for her. It is not something that belongs to her anymore. It belongs to the world. Anything she makes is now a part of culture. It's now a part of what people consider to be fantasy genre, right? So for me, it was easier to stay in the fandom and not abandon it, because I could recognize that I now have a certain power in saying, no, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the people who love it. It belongs to the people who needed it growing up, the people like me. And I can now, when I write my fan fiction, just out of spite, I can say that Ginny is trans. I can say that Luna is trans. And very often, in my viewpoint, when writing these characters, both of them are trans. And I typically see characters as gay when they are not canonically gay. I adjust my perspective on characters to say that, no, these characters don't belong to you anymore. And this is how I see them.
Yeah.
It is possible to have a character who is black that was not black in canon. I see Hermione Granger very much as a black woman. And I see Harry, actually, as half Indian, as in from the country of India. But I see him as mixed race and brown. And, you know, that can be really powerful to reclaim the characters you loved in order to feel the same level of comfort you once did. And that's how I've handled that as a fan, as someone who wants to continue interacting with a piece of media without thinking it was poisonous.
Yeah. And I can get that. Meanwhile, for me, the way that I've chosen to look at it is I feel like, especially when the author is alive, I really don't think that you can separate the art from the artist personally. Oftentimes, however that story was written with that person's background. Like, that person's influence and experiences drove them to eventually create that specific piece of work. So for me...
And you know what? You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
The influence of a mindset does affect how something is created.
Right.
That's an entirely valid point to take.
Yeah, and we can see that with plenty of other pieces of media too. But then sometimes it does feel like, especially in the case of Harry Potter, it does feel like that contradicts how that person feels, and that's kind of interesting. We can see that almost with Ender's Game as well. Ender's Game has that whole thing with having to grapple with destroying an entire civilization at the end of that, and yet it actually feels a little bit more poignant, and yet Orson Scott Card is incredibly homophobic, and so it's really kind of weird that there's this contrast of oh, we made a mistake, we should be more loving and more caring, and then he holds the beliefs that he does. So in some ways, yeah, it can almost feel completely opposite, but at the same time, a person wrote a particular work because they do have the beliefs. Ayn Rand grew up in the Soviet Union, and in her work, she very much shows that she is pro-rational egoism, and in fact, she pretty much created rational egoism. She's pro-capitalism, she's pro-individualism, she's pro all these ideals that America holds dear because she was struggling with and trying to escape from the ideals and the confinement of the Soviet Union. She really didn't like the experiences that she had growing up, and because of that, that drastically influenced her work. So for me, when it comes to looking at Harry Potter, I agree. I really appreciate the community. I love connecting with people that have Harry Potter interests. It's fun interacting with other people that are Harry Potter fans, and that is something that J.K. Rowling's never going to be able to take away, is that community. But also at the same time, when the new Fantastic Beasts movie comes out, I'm not going to go see that because I don't want to show her support. I don't want to, give her any money. All my Harry Potter stuff, yeah, I've put that in storage, because if someone, enters my car and sees some sort of time turner hanging from my rearview mirror, or if someone, comes into my house and sees a Harry Potter poster, I don't want their immediate reaction to be they're transphobic or they're supporting what J.K. Rowling says. So for me, I've boxed up all my Harry Potter stuff because I love interacting with the community, but also at the same time, it's a pretty hard thing because J.K. Rowling and all the stuff that she said and done is not good. Just a couple months after her statement, she released a book about a cross-dressing serial killer. That's not okay. And it's really bad. And a lot of the stuff that she says in her essay are completely outdated by decades. And it's she holds this idea that people should go to the bathroom of the gender that they were assigned at birth. And it's really not good. And so when I look at that, whenever I'm out in public, I can't wear a Harry Potter t-shirt. I don't want to have anything like that on my car because I don't want people thinking that I support that. But also at the same time, It's pretty hard growing up as a Harry Potter fan, wanting to still support and be with that community. So everyone's going to interact with it differently, but it's kind of a big thing.
Yeah, and you know what? You bring up a really good point, because I am also not going to give further money to what JKR creates. I'm not going to buy her books. I'm not going to see movies with her name attached to it. I'm not, because I believe that's important, and many people in the community feel the same way. However, my approach to the things I already have is that I have them. The money's already been spent. What's done is done. And these are things I associate with the people who gave them to me, and events I participated in. I have very strong memories attached to them. So I personally have kept my Harry Potter memorabilia and clothes. In fact, I am actually wearing a Harry Potter shirt right now because, I already have them.
Yeah.
In a way, the damage has been done.
And this is something that we see not just with J.K. Rowling. We see this with multiple other people. I'm sure by the time this podcast airs, someone, probably multiple other people will have come out as transphobic or doing sexist stuff in the workplace. At the time of this recording, Joss Whedon just basically got revealed by Charisma Carpenter and so many other people on the casts of Angel and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Firefly as basically emotionally and very verbally abusive to them. And this is something that is really surprising coming from someone that wrote these feminist shows like Buffy and Angel. It's so weird that someone who would write something about empowerment is turning out to be a really not great person. So I'm sure that by the time this airs, there will be way more of an update on this, but it's still really, really bad. And this is something that we see not just in media too, but in like society stuff, where if you're not like a white male, pretty much, like you're going to have a harder time when it comes to dealing with anything like the government. And I know Ditto has had like struggles with this when it comes to, you know, getting gender reassigned as well on like licenses and stuff.
Yeah, I definitely have experienced some of these struggles, especially when it comes to the system of getting names and markers changed. It's a whole lot of hurdles and hoops that you have to jump over and through just to be able to be yourself.
Yeah.
It's hard, it sucks, and it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
Very true. And it's just representation's such a big thing. And like we haven't even touched on mental health and how like negatively those with the different mental statuses are depicted in the media. You know, like we have like some examples like that, like the book Flowers for Algernon, which tries to shed some light on how mental health is kind of seen in like media and in society, and it tries to really depict that. But even still, that's like one piece of media that I think kind of just does an okay job, when really like it's definitely something that needs to have an even wider discussion as well. And it's just it's a whole big deal that, like, you know, there's there's so many different facets of representation that it would be great to talk about, but we don't really have time for. But like,
Yeah.
this isn't just like something that is gender related or sexuality related. Like, this is something that is way bigger than just those. Like, you know, it's dealing with mental health, it's talking about body shaming, it's talking about like any number of things, race. Like, society is, we're starting to get to the point where we're recognizing that all of this is an issue and that there needs to be better representation. And we do see movies that have better representation doing amazingly well in the theaters and Western culture. Like Crazy Rich Asians did really well. Like, that was a box office slam.
Yes, it was. And a sequel is coming out in 2022, apparently.
Oh, well, see, there you go. And like, that's a good thing. That just shows that people want diversity in their media. So it's
Absolutely.
just, yeah. So we're getting to the point where it's getting recognized and people are realizing, oh, like maybe we shouldn't depict this way, or maybe we need to have more of this, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing, is like we do have a lot of biases in that, like, Western culture loves binaries like we do. It's either
Yes.
liberal or conservative. It's, you know, male or female. It's public
It's
sector,
either this
private
or
sector.
that, and
Yeah, it keeps going.
there's really no consideration for any kind of medium.
Yeah, it's
othering. Astounding.
Yeah.
It's like you're either an individual or you are a member of the community, and I would argue that every person on the planet is both.
Yeah, and that's something that we kind of talk about a little bit in the capitalism episode, is this idea that you are influenced by your culture and you also influence your culture. Like, there's an exchange that happens there. Like, yeah, your culture can influence you, but one person can also spark revolutionary change. And so
Absolutely.
that's important to remember, is that like there's not just a group collective and there's not just individuality. Like, we rely on each other to continue to survive, but we can also have our own thoughts, our own opinions, and our own unique different intersectionalities with our culture.
I definitely agree, because people are made of intersections. I am not only non-binary. I am non-binary. I am a friend. I am a family member. I am a sibling. I am someone who loves Harry Potter. I am someone who loves Lord of the Rings. I am made up of so many different pathways. I am a Jew. I am someone who is small. I am someone who is strong. I am someone who is creative. I am someone who writes. I am someone who listens. There are so many ways I am myself that I cannot list them all in this podcast. It's just not possible. And everyone is made of different intersections. We are not only one thing, and we are not only ourselves. We are everyone we have ever met, because those people change us.
Oh, that was very poignant.
And speaking of trans rights, it's time we transition on into the next segment, our legendary treasure hunt.
For this episode's legendary treasure hunt, the goal was to find Mysticat lots with a price of $40 or less. The rules are that you get 1 point for every Mysticat, and then a further half a point for every $5 under the goal, minus half a point for every Shroom Boom in the lot, because he's absolutely terrible.
Yes. See, you're on your second episode as a guest, and you're learning how awful Shroom Boom is.
I mean, I did have to battle Shroom Boom, and I won without even trying, so... Alright, Ditto and Inklander, what did y'all come up with?
Alright, so this week, I would just like to preface this by saying that this was extremely difficult. I don't think I saw any lot out there, anywhere, for any price, with more than one Mysticat in it.
Yeah, like, it was pretty hard finding
Agreed.
this one. But we wanted to go with Mysticat because, like, fun fact, he is the only female-voiced male Skylander. And going back to the topic of reclaiming characters, like we were talking about in the last segment, we kind of view Mysticat as gender fluid or non-binary, and so that's why we decided to go with Mysticat for this segment of the Legendary Treasure Hunt. But oh my gosh, this challenge was hard.
Right.
It was hard!
So, my air quotes lot for this week is a singular Mysticat new in box for the price of $8.40.
So,
Ditto's
not bad.
quote-unquote lot has 1 point for the Mysticat included, and then 3 additional points for being $30 under the goal, so that brings us a total of 4 points total.
Very nice. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good lot, too, especially because it's new in box. Like, you don't really see too many new in box Skylanders nowadays. And so, Mysticat new in box is actually pretty good, especially for that price as well. So, like, not bad.
Mm-hmm.
That might be worthy of the extra special bonus point, I think, personally. But
I believe that decision is up to me, so we'll have to see how everyone else did. What do you got, Inklander?
all right, so my lot came from eBay as well. And, well, I say lot. Like Ditto, it is one Mysticat, and one Mysticat only. And the price of the lot is $9.99.
All right, that means you get 1 point for the Mysticat and a further 3 points for being $30 under the price point. So you have earned yourself 4 points as well.
All right,
Good
we're tied.
job.
All right, but what about you?
Well, I found an actual lot on Mercari because I'm good at this.
We'll see. We'll see.
My lot includes a Mysticat, of course. It also includes a Kingpin and a Chopscotch, and they are billed as super clean, in case you all were wondering. The price on my lot is $32 with free shipping.
Very nice.
So if you're interested in those characters, Mercari has got your back. Okay, so I get 1 point for the Mysticat figure, and I get a further half a point because of one $5 under. So that's 1.5 points, but I am going to give myself the bonus point because it's an actual lot instead of an individual figurine.
Well, I guess that's fair.
That's definitely fair.
Not even the bonus point can help me win. It is still a tie between Ditto and Inklander. 4 points apiece.
Awesome.
Good game. Good game.
Good game, everyone. This challenge was, well, a challenge.
It really was, to the point where we weren't even able to find lots except for Nagemeikenu there, so
I
good
I
job.
saw lots. I saw lots, but when an individual figure was going to point out higher, obviously I went with the higher points.
That's true. I mean, same. Like I get
I
that.
scoured the entire internet as best I could for any deal that had more than one Mysticat in it, and I just could not find one.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. I couldn't find anything with more than one.
Yeah, so in this case, if you do like Mysticat, you might be slightly out of luck here. You might just have to pay the $10-20 for Mysticat, but yeah, this was definitely a pretty hard challenge.
I like Mysticat, so I'm fairly disappointed.
Yeah, Mysticat's cool.
I mean, on the one hand, I already have a Mysticat, but I could pick up a second one for the alternate path for like $10. So
Yeah, so it's not awful. It's not
that's
awful.
my takeaway from this legendary treasure hunt this week.
Yeah, he's not Wildstorm, so you should be able to find him a little bit easily.
Now that we have bemoaned the difficulty of this challenge, it is time we moved on to a Dread Yacht destinations.
We are aboard the Dread Yacht. Normally, I'd say we're floating above the clouds or something like that, but I wouldn't know because I'm down in the galley. Jetvac has been complaining that somebody's stolen his lunch, so I've decided I'm going to share mine with him. Feeling a little snacky anyway. Inklander and Nagemeikenu are up on deck with Flynn and Jetvac discussing our next destination, and well, it's got to be here somewhere. I had 2 whole subs in here. Someone stole my lunch. Alright, so I'm going to go up to deck and tell them we need to land at the Sky Fortress. Those vultures are getting out of hand, stealing people's lunches. So in today's tour, we will be visiting the Sky Fortress from Skylanders Imaginators.
Yay!
Yes, yet another Imaginator level. Well, hey, it feels like we cover Imaginator levels a lot, but the good thing about that is this is my least favorite game, so that means it must be getting over with soon. Because oh my gosh.
The shade.
I know. Like, hey, at least we're doing all the Imaginator levels, like, now. It's not been intentional. We've just been doing a lot of Imaginator levels. We pretty much mostly pick all the levels randomly anyway, but not the point. I'm rambling. So, Sky Fortress. Yeah, this one is not a bad level. Like, I don't think it's, like, bad like some of the other levels in Imaginators, but it's fine. Like, I'd say that it's almost on par with a typical Skylanders level. Like, it's got some pretty good platforming. I really like what they do with the moving platforms in this one. I actually think that's kind of fun, and it feels kind of unique. I really do like that. And I also really like the different fight sequences, and I also kind of like how we're in the second half of this level moving around the ship. We're having to activate some stuff, do some push block puzzles, but also do some fights. Like, I actually feel like there's a decent variety of stuff to do in this level. It just, I don't know, for some reason it falls flat. It might be the design, like it just might be the art direction. I feel is a little samey almost, especially the interior part of the level just doesn't feel very striking or very exciting. So because of that might be the reason why I don't like this level, but like honestly I think the gameplay is more or less solid. I don't really like the crane part, but overall like it's fine. Like it's not bad by any means, but it's definitely not one of my favorite levels from Imaginators either. It's just fine.
So this level for me was a lot of fun. I thought it was, again, interesting how you're meant to switch between the different types of characters, and there's a good variety as well. And for me, I liked the consistency that outside fire was strong. Like when you're out on the ship and blowing stuff up, you're encouraged to use fire characters. So that was nice to see that you could come back to the fire ones and switch out for other tasks. And I like a little bit of consistency when I play, because then I know what I'm doing better.
That's
I'm still learning the
interesting.
game.
Like, that's interesting. I've never really thought of it as like how precisely the elemental zones correlate with what's going on thematically in the level. Like, I've always known that like life characters are strong with like a life gate or a life area, but I've never really thought like, oh yeah, like a place where you're having to like do explosions and things like that, that's going to be associated with fire. Like, that makes sense, but I've never actually noticed when you're just playing through the general part of a level how accurately the element swaps change and like work with like the theming and the plot. That's actually kind of cool. So I like that. I like that perspective on
Yeah,
it.
yeah, as I've played more, I like the way that works because it starts to make sense when I switch Skylanders. Um, because it didn't before, it felt random. But I appreciated saying, okay, here's the theme of where I am. So, of course, the Skylander is going to be more useful. And I basically went through the entire box of Skylanders and was like, okay, I'm going to pick one for every element, and those are the Skylanders I'm going to use. And it was nice to have, for this level, again, the fire one to come back to when I was outside doing stuff.
Okay.
Because it was, again, do this thing on the deck, go somewhere else and do something else, and then come back, do some more fighting, and then you have another task with another Skylander encouraged.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I really like that perspective on it.
Yeah, I thought it was a good level. I don't know, for me it was a little long because it just seems to take forever to do all of the things, but I think that's also because I am easily overwhelmed by making choices.
Oh yeah, and Skylanders does have a lot of choices.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. It was a little easier because I had already gotten out each element of Skylander that I had planned for and said, like, okay, this is my dark one, this is my tech one, this is my life one, this is my water one, and those are the things I'm going to use, and the rest of the box is going to stay in the chair.
Now, for me, I find this level to be immensely fun. I really enjoy how platforming heavy it is. The one thing I really don't enjoy about this level is the Wrecking Ball, as Inklander said. That I wouldn't say the controls feel loose, but it's difficult to control, would be a more accurate statement.
Yeah.
And especially in the case of speedruns, it's just obnoxious, is what it is. It feels more like a chore than anything else.
Yeah, because you're having to knock the crates off, you're having to knock the enemies off. It just, yeah, it really kind of slows things down. And as you say, the controls aren't awful. Like, it's definitely doable. But, you know, especially in comparison to the grind rail challenges, where the controls for that are horrendous. That part's not bad, but it definitely does kind of have the pacing take a hit.
Yes, it definitely does. That aside, the rest of this level is great. With the push block puzzles and with all the platforming, there's a lot of combat. This is a very combat heavy level, and it's really just overall enjoyable. Then the Night Doomlander for the boss. That one, at least my first playthrough, kind of kept me on my toes because he has such a wide area he can hit. And at the same time, you're dodging a wrecking ball similar to the one that you were forced to use earlier in the level. And that can do a significant amount of damage as well. So it was a little more interesting than some of the other Doomlander fights. Although I can see where Inklander would be coming from on this one when he would generally say that it feels samey.
Yeah, like, it's not bad. Like, I don't think it's like a great level, but like, I think the coolest thing for me is the platforming on the like pivoting platforms.
Yes.
Like, I think that makes this level really distinct, and that I think is cool. That's some pretty good platforming, I think, at its finest there. Like, I really enjoy those parts of this level. It comes back later in Abandoned Amusement Park. I'm not really fond of how it's used there. I think it's kind of just weird that they threw it in. But here, I really do like it. Like, it's kind of at the shipyard area anyway, so it almost seems like these platforms are being used to like move things around. Typically, you're even able to see them spinning and moving in some places. So that actually was pretty cool. I really like that. But otherwise, yeah, I don't know. It's just something about this level that makes it kind of feel okay. I really do think that it's just kind of the theming. Like, I just don't know if I really like the art style and design of this level personally. But I think that's kind of the main thing. But yeah, otherwise, it has your push block puzzles, it has your fights, it has your Doomlander fight at the end, and I think that's all good. But yeah, the thing that I think is the most recognizable for me, and the thing that I think is the most enjoyable is definitely those platforms.
Yeah, the platforming definitely really stood out in this level, and it was fantastic.
Yeah. Now, also, I do like Jetvac as well. I do have to mention Jetvac. He's fun.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I like him.
Yeah. I like the voice actor for him. He plays the character when you're playing as a figure. He voices him in the game, and also he voices the character on the show too. So he's one of the few voice actors. Yeah, he's one of the few voice actors who's actually played all iterations of that character. And
that's lovely.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that they didn't try to go get like a big name voice actor or a big name actor to go play Jetvac on the show. Like they actually kept Greg Ellis, which is nice. So he does a good job with it. I think he always does a very good job of making Jetvac have that kind of dry humor to him, and I really appreciate that. And also, you know, one thing that we didn't even talk about at all in the main segment is like ageism or ableism, but here we have a character who has lost his wings and who is also a little bit older, but he's not depicted as like not being able to do things. Like he's here, he's a Skylander, he's heroic, he's helping to lead us through this level, and I really appreciate that about Jetvac. Like I think that really adds a lot of personality to his characters. Like he is this guy who's going to get back up, he's going to fight, you know, like it's good. Like we have a older character depicted here who is like very strong, and he's very much like a go-getter, and I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, I really liked this character. The voice is very distinct, which is why I really like that the same voice actor came and kept doing his voice. I think definitely getting someone else to do it would have been a mistake. And I don't know, he has a comforting presence for me. Like he's just so authoritative, and he's like, you're going to do this now, you're going to do this, and now we are going to do this because that's how we're going to defeat all of the things.
Yeah.
And I was just like, yes, okay, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I am capable of doing this because you are inspiring confidence.
Yeah, he actually does have a very good voice. Like I wouldn't be opposed to hearing like Jetvac do like books on tape.
Yeah.
like
yeah, could you read me a bedtime story?
Yeah. Like he'd be very good at it. Like I do think he has.
Sorry, what's a tape?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant downloads. That new Fandangled thing.
I'm just kidding. I remember clearly what a tape cassette is.
So do I.
Yeah, downloads.
We're all
I apologize. I know. Yeah, we all grew up around the time that like cassettes were there, but also like DVDs and CDs were kind of slowly becoming a thing. But it was weird, honestly.
Yeah.
But,
I remember when CDs started to become a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. My parents started transferring their entire cassette collection onto CDs. Like they would burn from the cassette to the CD and keep their stuff. And I was just like, oh, this is a thing. And
yeah, like VHS.
All of the cars had the cassette player, and you had to use the pencil to do the thing. And
yeah, I wonder if we're gonna get an okay boomer in the comments now. Hopefully not.
Well, none of us are boomers, so they're inaccurate.
I know, like it won't prevent them from saying it anyway. But hey, that's ageism,
right?
So anyway, yeah, like I really do like his character, and he's just a lot of fun. Like he would be very good at books on downloads or on MP3 files, whatever you want to call it, on Spotify.
Audiobooks.
Yeah, that, sure.
There we go.
Audiobooks, yes, or a podcast.
We got there eventually.
Or a podcast.
We're young and hip.
Yeah, right. I'm not, you know, unknowledgeable on these things. I know.
We got there before I had to replace my hip, so.
Yeah, I know about the Fortnites and the Among Us.
I'm on the Tumblr. I'm cool.
Yeah.
Now that we've recovered some semblance of lunch from one of the fridges and given it to Jetvac so that he can satisfy his rumbly tummy, it's time to be off to our next destination, which in this case is the Archean Arena.
Welcome everyone to the Archean Arena, where we pit Skylander against Skylander in a bout of hypothetical combat, because Activision took away PvP, and this is what we have to do now. So, for this week, I've been trying to look for my portal, but it looks like the vultures have stolen it along with the sandwiches, so luckily though, Ditto's and Nagemeikenu's portals are functioning, so it looks like the battle's just going to be between them. So, Nagemeikenu, why don't you go ahead and start off detailing your Skylander?
The Skylander I have chosen for this battle is Nightmare. She is a melee dark elemental.
Nightmare has a health of 900, a critical hit of 62, an armor of 31, speed of 45, and luck of 26. So tell us a little bit about Nightmare's attacks.
Nightmare's first attack is Traptanium Flamberge. This ability swings her Traptanium Flamberge sword. Her secondary ability is a Shadow Joust, which allows her to charge right through enemies. Her third attack is Battle Horn, and that stuns nearby enemies.
Traptanium Flamberge deals 53 points of damage, Shadow Joust deals 21 points of damage, and the third attack, Battle Horn, deals 21 points of damage. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the upgrade paths for Nightmare?
So the top path is called Shadow Summoner, which increases the max number of shadowy clones, and those explode and heal you. And then the attack 3 destroys clones to power up attacks. The bottom path is the Flamberge Aficionado, which allows attack 1 to gain combos, and Flamberge deals increased damage.
Nice.
Oh no.
So Nightmare is a pretty fun character. She is actually really cool. She was the first Dark Element character introduced, and she's a lot of fun. She's got a lot of cool moves. I really like her joust kind of abilities. They're really fun. And her lance is just such a really awesome Traptanium weapon. So let's go ahead and throw it on over to Ditto, but as Ditto's about to summon her character, one of the vultures tries to swoop down and grab it. Ditto's wrestling with the portal with the vulture, and the portal snaps in two yet again. So it looks like Ditto's portal, malfunctioning, is summoning forth Head Rush for our Archean Arena today.
Oh no.
Oh,
Well,
so sorry.
that's a massive downgrade from the character I had chosen. Okay. So, Head Rush is a melee Earth Elemental Skylander.
Head Rush's health is 1020, has a critical hit of 56, armor 33, speed of 55, and luck of 24.
Head Rush's attack 1 is called Traptanium Horns, which allows her to head bash enemies, and if you hold the attack, she will charge ahead, full throttle. Her attack 2 is called Stomp. She stomps the ground, generating a shockwave that deals damage to enemies. Her attack 3 is Yodel, which allows her to yodel, pulsing outwards to deal damage to all enemies in range.
Traptanium Horns do 41 points of damage. Attack 2 Stomp deals 24 points of damage, and the tertiary attack Yodel deals 24 points of damage.
For upgrade paths, Head Rush's top path is known as Lungs of Steel, which allows her attack 3 to deal increased damage and destroy the ground beneath her, which will cause enemies to slow down. And her bottom path is called Stomp Harder, and allows for attack 2 to gain increased damage, destroys the ground beneath her, and allows for turning during a charge to deal increased damage.
Yeah, so here we have Nightmare versus Head Rush, and Head Rush is kind of notoriously known as being one of the worst trap masters, but nevertheless, let's see what exactly the strategy is going to be for these two champions this week.
So the way I would try to play this is either path allows for the ground to be destroyed, so I would definitely focus on keeping the ground pretty well wrecked to slow down Nightmare, because that Flamberge does do a lot of damage rather quickly, and Head Rush's attacks are fairly slow by comparison. But then that would allow me to go ahead and try to charge through Nightmare with that attack 1, because just doing the attack 1 doesn't combo, and it's rather slow, so I feel like using it to charge would be the better option, and it would allow me to potentially dodge attacks as well.
Nagemeikenu, what would your strategy be here?
I am looking at numbers and I'm seeing that Nightmare Flamberge does do a lot of damage, but Head Rush's health is quite a bit higher, I think. So I think I am going to focus on the Shadow Summoner path, because that way, when Head Rush does do damage, I can also heal myself while trying to make sure my attacks land, because it already does quite a bit of damage, so I'm not worried about taking the Flamberge aficionado necessarily. I think the strategy is stay up long enough for the damage to be done.
Yeah, that makes sense. Nightmare also has a pretty decent critical hit, too, which is a little bit higher than Head Rush's, but still should be able to help with that damage dealing as well. And while Nightmare doesn't really have the armor up or really the speed up, there is also just a little bit more of luck there, too. So if you do end up taking that top path, you might be able to manage to stay in a little bit longer to be able to take out that extra 100 points of health to Head Rush, especially because the Traptanium Flamberge deals roughly 10 more points of damage compared to the Traptanium Horns. Granted, though, the Stomp and the Yodel are pretty much about as on par with your attack 2 and 3, so this could kind of actually end up being a little close here, depending on the strategies that both of you are employing.
In this case, I feel like the fact that I have more experience as a Portal Master would come in quite handy here.
Probably.
Absolutely. I think you could take me.
Probably. Like, honestly, like, while Head Rush is kind of getting a bad rep here, like, actually, it kind of looks like Head Rush could deal with this pretty well by using those Traptanium Horns, doing the Stomp there, doing kind of like a combination of the two. Might actually be able to take out Nightmare's health kind of quickly. Even if Nightmare is kind of healing. Like, it could actually come down to be really incredibly close.
It really could.
Yeah, it really depends on who stays up longer.
Yeah, pretty much.
What attacks hit, what attacks don't.
Yeah, it depends on those luck stats as well, and how lucky you're going to be able to dodge attacks and things like that. So, yeah, like, this actually could be kind of close. So
I'm not sure how I would even call this one,
but
like, that's not on me this week.
Yeah, I know. Like, the thing is like, depending, like, this could be like a, 4 out of 10 for Head Rush or Nightmare, or like, like, it could be like 4 to 6, or it could be 5 to 5. Like, this could be a tie. Like, it really kind of looks like this could be an even matchup. Like, if we're going with Ditto's skilled Portal Mastery compared to Nagemeikenu, who's just getting into Skylanders a little bit more, like, I don't know, like, I would call it for Ditto, but the thing is like, if these characters just stood there on the paths that, you're going to place them on, and just started, like, attacking each other, I honestly couldn't tell you which one would win. Like,
yeah.
So that's the thing, is, like, I don't know, I might honestly have to call it a tie. Like, this is surprisingly close, frankly.
Yeah, I think Head Rush is getting a bad rep. I got to play a little bit of Trap Team. I liked using her. I thought she was fun. So I was kind of sad when I heard she's not really considered very good.
Well, I mean, I guess here we go.
It's primarily because her primary attack doesn't combo, and it's not very quick.
Yeah, that is the thing.
Oh.
So
the damage can stack up, but it's just not as quick as other characters.
Yeah.
Wait, does that mean if I took the bottom path where I could combo the Flamberge, I'd have a better chance of winning due to that, because I can combo and your character can't?
That actually could be possible. I don't know how much of a damage increase that bottom path does, but all things considering, yeah, the Flamberge might be able to hit a little bit faster than those Traptanium Horns could. So, I mean, the swinging the lance also isn't very fast, but maybe? Like, it's possible. Like, that might give Nightmare a little bit more of a boost over Head Rush, but even then, I think it'd be like a 3 out of 5 matchup with Nightmare winning.
Yeah. I think it'd be close.
Wow. So this is actually kind of surprising. I'm actually surprised Headrush is doing this well. So hey, look at that. I guess, Headrush isn't potentially as bad as we think that she is. So
Yeah.
so it's kind of
I think she
surprising.
needs to be utilized correctly.
Yeah. So I think in this case, I'm gonna call it a draw. Like this, I think this could actually be really close. So I think this week we're gonna have a tie in the Archean Arena between Headrush and Nightmare.
Woo.
Awesome. Good game.
Well played, Ditto.
That brings us to the end of today's episode. I'd like to offer a special thank you to our guest, Nagemeikenu, for joining us today.
Aw, thank you for having me. It was so much fun to come back.
It was so much fun to have you back.
Yes, it was great having you back on, especially to talk about a really important topic.
You'll find our website and our individual channels listed in the description, including Nagemeikenu's. Follow our Twitter at SLPortalcasters for regular updates about the podcast, and join our Discord server for Skylanders discussions. Thank you for listening, and in the next episode, we will be discussing the best and the worst NPCs in Skylanders. See you then.
Bye. Hey, it's useful for speedruns. It saves you countless seconds, so...
Well, I found an actual lot on Mercari because I'm good at this.
We'll see.
So if you're interested in those characters, Mercari has got your back.
So what I'm hearing is you got a 1.5.
Okay, so yes.